Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I noticed it first during dinner, just a fleeting glance at her phone, a quick swipe, and that little smirk she used to reserve for me. Something changed in Monica's eyes, something light, eager. I couldn't pinpoint it right away, but the moment was enough to plant a seed of doubt. My wife, who'd once hung on every word I said, now seemed to be lost in a conversation that didn't involve me at all. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but the thought clung to me like a stubborn stain. It grew worse over the next few days. Monica seemed to float through the house, her attention elsewhere. If I asked her about work, she'd offer vague answers, eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. I told myself it was just a phase. Everyone goes through rough patches, but the nagging feeling wouldn't let go. When she started dressing a little nicer, subtle things like new perfume and freshly manicured nails, I felt the ground beneath me shift. Who was she trying to impress? I replayed those moments over and over in my mind, her guarded smiles. The time she sat across from me at the dinner table, her body present, but her mind a million miles away. Every interaction now felt loaded, full of things left unsaid. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but every time I opened my mouth, the words caught in my throat. A sickening voice inside whispered that I already knew the answer. Our marriage had been stable, predictable, something I'd once considered a strength. I'd worked hard to provide a comfortable life for us. My job in finance kept me busy, but I made time for her, for us. I thought we were building something together. Turns out, I was wrong. The signs I'd ignored, dismissed as paranoia, now screamed at me from every corner of our life. One Friday evening when she told me she had to work late, I didn't say a word. I watched her rush out, heels clicking against the hardwood floors, a faint whiff of that new perfume lingering in her wake. The smell turned my stomach. As the front door closed behind her, I stood in the silence of our living room, the emptiness of it pressing down on me. Something snapped inside. I paced the length of the house, my mind racing. Was I being crazy? Was this all just in my head? I glanced at her side of the closet where dresses I'd never seen her wear hung neatly in a row. Dresses she never wore for me. An anger I hadn't known I was capable of simmered beneath the surface. I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling, and scrolled through our shared calendar. No mention of work commitments, no meetings, nothing. The old Jason, the trusting, reliable husband, would have let it go. But he was already slipping away, giving ground to a different version of me, one that wasn't afraid to dig deeper. I started noticing more clues. Unlocked, Monica's phone lay innocuously on the kitchen counter one morning. She was in the shower, and for a moment I stared at the device, a line I'd never crossed flashing brightly in front of me. My chest tightened, and I could almost hear my heart pounding in the quiet of our home. I reached for it, hesitated, then pulled back. Not yet. I wasn't ready for whatever truth I might find, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling gnawing at me, a constant reminder that the life I thought I knew was unraveling. Monica's behavior grew more erratic. Her mood swings were sharp and unpredictable. Some days she'd be unusually cheerful, chattering away about trivial things, almost as if she were compensating for the distance I felt growing between us. Other times she'd retreat into herself, her responses clipped and terse, as if every word I spoke annoyed her. It was as if she was leading two separate lives, one where I was still part of the picture and another where I was just a footnote. I made an effort to get back to who we used to be, suggesting date nights, initiating conversations about our future. Each time she'd find a reason to say no, too tired. Deadlines at work, it was always something, and yet she found time to go out with friends I barely knew. She came home late, reeking of cigarettes and alcohol, clothes wrinkled as if she'd been somewhere she shouldn't have been. My patience thinned until it was a threadbare veneer of civility. I tried to suppress the anger, the resentment, but it seeped out in our conversations. Small, sarcastic jabs, questions posed as jokes that weren't funny. I couldn't help it. Something about her calm, collected exterior drove me mad. Did she think I was a fool? That I wouldn't notice the cracks in our life? One night I came across a receipt tucked into her coat pocket. A high-end restaurant, one I'd never been to. The bill was astronomical, more than we'd ever spent on a single dinner together. 2 entrees, wine, dessert. My chest constricted, the air in the room suddenly too thick to breathe. I put the receipt back carefully, then stood there, staring at her coat as if it might reveal more of its secrets. Maybe it wasn't true, I thought. Maybe she was out with clients. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But with each maybe, I sank deeper into a pit of self-doubt and suspicion. My logical mind, the part of me that prided itself on rationality and control, was breaking under the strain. It wasn't just about where she was or who she was with. It was about the person I was becoming. Every time I questioned her, I questioned myself more. Was I really so inadequate? Had I been blind for so long? The house, once filled with warmth and shared memories, felt like a mausoleum now, each room echoing with the ghosts of what we used to be. Her laughter, once a source of joy, now grated on my nerves, its sound hollow and false. The thought of her betraying me, slipping away into someone else's arms, twisted something dark and unrelenting inside me. I couldn't prove it yet, but the certainty grew each day, tightening around me like a noose. I started paying closer attention. Every time her phone buzzed, I watched her reaction, sometimes a faint smile, other times she'd turn away, angling the screen just out of my sight. I caught glimpses of names I didn't recognize, messages she quickly dismissed. When I asked, she brushed it off, always with a casual excuse that left me fuming, desperate for answers she wouldn't give. By the end of the week, I was a raw bundle of nerves. I hadn't slept properly in days, the bags under my eyes growing darker. Monica noticed, but her concern was superficial. She'd reach out to touch my shoulder, then pull back as if reconsidering. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore, it was physical, palpable. I could feel it in the way she moved around me, careful, as if afraid of provoking something she couldn't control. Each night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in excruciating detail, trying to understand, trying to figure out where I went wrong. But I knew deep down I hadn't gone wrong. This wasn't my failure, this was something else, something that had wormed its way into our lives and shattered everything I thought I knew. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. My suspicions had grown into certainty. Now all I needed was proof. Now that I was certain something was wrong, I couldn't let it go. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to find proof, to confirm what my gut already knew. It was no longer about preserving our marriage or confronting her. It was about reclaiming control, reclaiming my sanity. I became hyper-aware of every word she said. Conversations we'd once had effortlessly now felt strained, stilted. I'd bring up mundane topics, weekend plans, dinner ideas, just to watch her face tighten, eyes flicking away like I was an irritant. Every time her phone buzzed, I glanced at it, catching the subtle flicker of her lips, that faint ghost of a smile that had been absent when we were together. She didn't think I noticed, but I did. I noticed everything. I started keeping track. Times, places, excuses. Monica's late meetings started happening more frequently. The hours she spent away from home stretching longer each night. She came back smelling of cologne, a scent too strong and unfamiliar. She'd brush past me without a word, head held high, as if daring me to ask questions. And I did, at first. But each time I got the same dismissive responses. "Work's been hectic," she'd sigh, the exasperation in her tone daring me to push further. "I'm tired, Jason, just let it go." So I stopped asking and started looking for answers on my own. The night she was working late, I sat in the car parked down the street from her office building, watching as the lights dimmed floor by floor. My heart would pound in my chest, thundering in the silent darkness. But I'd wait and wait. Until finally she'd emerge, dressed in that fitted skirt she never wore for me, her hair still perfect despite the hour. But it wasn't the Monica I knew who left the building. It was someone else, someone animated and carefree. One evening, I decided to follow her. I tailed her at a safe distance, my headlights off, keeping the silhouette of her car just visible. She didn't head home, didn't turn toward any of her usual haunts. Instead, she drove across town, weaving through streets until she pulled into a parking garage near a luxury hotel. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I watched her step out, head held high, heels clicking on the concrete. She didn't hesitate, didn't look back. Minutes later, a tall man joined her. Greg, a name that had floated around the edges of my suspicion. The corporate shark with too much money and a smirk I already hated. They didn't even try to hide it, arms wrapped around each other, laughing, eyes locked like there was no one else in the world. It was obscene the way they moved, the ease with which they flaunted their connection. I sat there, invisible in the darkness, my knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. Everything inside me churned. Rage, disgust, a crushing sense of betrayal. I should have confronted them, stormed up, and demanded answers. But I didn't. I stayed frozen, the cold grip of reality sinking in. This was what it felt like to be powerless, to watch your life unravel while you sat helpless on the sidelines. It wasn't enough to just see it, though. I needed something tangible, something undeniable. The next morning, after Monica left for one of her meetings, I took her spare laptop, one she rarely used anymore, and booted it up. As it loaded, I felt a twisted sense of dread. What was I hoping to find? Did I even want to know? But the old Jason, the one who'd blindly trusted his wife, was gone. I needed to see it for myself. I scrolled through her files, fingers trembling slightly. At first, there was nothing, no emails, no messages, just a series of mundane work documents. Then I found a hidden folder, buried under layers of subdirectories. A simple click, and there they were, dozens of photos, some blurred and hasty, others painfully clear. Monica and Greg in hotel rooms, restaurants, even our own neighborhood. They looked happy. More than that, they looked free, free from me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I continued to scroll, bile rising in my throat. Text messages, exchanged through an encrypted app I'd never even heard of, spilled across the screen. Each one felt like a slap in the face. Explicit, cruel, mocking me without even knowing it. She'd shared things with him I hadn't heard in years, laughed about me, called me predictable, boring. It was like a knife twisting deeper with every sentence. But I didn't cry, didn't rage. I felt something colder, sharper, like a blade slicing away the last fragments of affection I'd once held for her. My hands steady, I saved everything to a flash drive. Evidence, proof, a weapon should I choose to use it. I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't confront her when she came home that night, humming softly as she kicked off her heels and made herself comfortable on our couch. Our couch. The same place we'd sat countless times, talking about our dreams, our future. But those days were gone, replaced by something darker. Instead, I became the perfect husband, attentive, supportive. Every time she lied to my face, I smiled back, hiding the contempt coiling inside me like a viper waiting to strike. Let her think she'd fooled me. Let her think I was oblivious. Because I wasn't going to just expose her. I was going to destroy her. I continued to follow her sporadically, watching as she and Greg's relationship deepened. They were careless, almost arrogant in their disregard for my presence in her life. Monica began disappearing for entire weekends, claiming work trips or girls' nights out. I'd watch them from a distance, seething as they flaunted their affair in public spaces. She'd throw her head back in laughter, her face flushed and radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years. A part of me marveled at how thoroughly she'd deceived me. But most of me just burned with the need to make her pay. One rainy evening, I decided to escalate. I waited until she was asleep, then slipped downstairs to our office. The cold glow of the computer screen illuminated my face as I logged into her email account. She didn't know I'd installed a keylogger months ago. Every password, every little secret she thought was safe I had access to. I knew things she didn't even know I'd seen. The email threads were more of the same, flirting, explicit messages, plans for their future. But something caught my eye. A transaction between her and Greg. A loan, or rather an investment, he'd made in some startup she was involved in. My lips curled into a smile. So that's how she was financing her little excursions. She was using his money. I went deeper, searching through every hidden nook and cranny of her correspondence until I found it. A proposal for a major deal Greg was considering. Monica's name was all over it, promising him returns she couldn't possibly deliver. I'd heard enough about the company she mentioned to know it was a sinking ship. If I could time things right, I could hit her where it hurt most, her pride and her bank account. When I finally confronted her, really confronted her, it wouldn't be with tears or accusations. I wanted to see her face when she realized how badly she'd miscalculated, that all the freedom she thought she'd gained would be stripped away, piece by piece, until she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her choices. I watched her one final night from a distance, my car parked just a few blocks away from Greg's condo. They were on the balcony, wine glasses in hand, Monica leaning against him like she belonged there. It was almost beautiful in a grotesque, twisted way. This version of her, so different from the one I'd known, was more confident, more alive. But it was all a lie. As they disappeared inside, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it, the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. This was it. I'd amassed everything I needed. Emails, photos, bank statements. It was time to start unraveling her life the way she'd unraveled mine. I drove home in silence, my thoughts a tangled web of revenge and regret. The house was dark when I entered, the only sound my steady footsteps as I made my way up to our bedroom. Monica was already asleep, her body curled under the covers, face relaxed and peaceful. The sight of her like that, a woman who'd torn my world apart, should have infuriated me. But instead, I felt nothing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out her phone. The passcode, thanks to my surveillance, was no mystery. I swiped through her messages, scanning through her lies. And then I found the one that confirmed it all. Her and Greg, planning their next weekend getaway. Laughing about my cluelessness. Talking about how she was finally going to get rid of the dead weight. I almost smiled. They'd know soon enough what it felt like to be caught off guard, what it felt like to lose everything. I slipped her phone back and stood there staring at the woman I once loved. She had no idea what was coming. "Good night, Monica," I whispered softly. "Enjoy your dreams. They're all you'll have left soon enough." The next few days passed in a blur of cold calculations and meticulous planning. Every time I looked at Monica, feigning interest in whatever banal excuse she had for her latest disappearance, I saw the cracks in our marriage widening. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about stripping away the illusions she'd wrapped herself in, making her face the stark truth that she'd underestimated me. I spent hours poring over our finances, studying every account, every transaction. Monica had been careless, assuming I was still the same passive husband she could manipulate and deceive. I found loopholes she hadn't even thought to cover, accounts that were easy enough to consolidate and drain. One by one, I closed off every avenue she might have used to maintain her lifestyle. All our joint savings, stocks, and emergency funds, gone, funneled into a private account she couldn't touch. It was almost too easy. She had no idea how thoroughly I knew her routines, how predictable she'd become in her arrogance. I timed everything perfectly. When she called one afternoon to say she'd be working late again, I drove straight to our bank. There was no hesitation as I requested to withdraw the maximum amount allowed and transfer the rest electronically. By the time I walked out, there wasn't a single penny left in any of the accounts she had access to. That night, I waited until she was asleep, then retrieved the small, nondescript safe deposit box we kept hidden at the back of our closet. It held some sentimental items, a few gifts, keepsakes from our wedding, and what little cash we'd stashed there over the years. I took everything, leaving the box empty except for a single piece of paper. I folded it neatly, placing it in the center. It read, "Good luck living off your boyfriend." I knew exactly when she'd find it. The rush of satisfaction I felt was tempered by something darker. This wasn't the thrill of revenge. It was the feeling of losing something, of discarding a part of myself I'd once valued. But I couldn't turn back. I couldn't allow her to get away with it, not after what she'd done. The next morning I watched her, calm and detached, as she got ready for work. There was no guilt, no flicker of shame on her face. She hummed softly under her breath, hair pinned back in that sleek, professional style she'd adopted recently. I wondered if she'd wear it like that for Greg. Probably. The thought made my stomach twist, but I held it down. "Have a good day," I said as she headed for the door, voice steady. She paused, glancing at me with faint surprise as if she'd expected more friction. Maybe she'd been hoping for another round of tense silence or a poorly concealed jab. But I just smiled, bland and uninterested. Let her stew in that. Let her wonder. "Thanks," she murmured, a trace of uncertainty in her tone. And then she was gone. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from me. This was the last morning she'd walk out of our house believing she had it all figured out. By the time she returned, everything would have changed. I felt a strange pang of something, regret maybe, or just the weight of what I was about to do, but I pushed it aside. There was no place for weakness now. Later that afternoon, I received a message from the bank confirming the transfers had been completed. I stared at the notification, feeling a flicker of triumph. It was done. Everything we'd built together, every cent we'd saved, was gone. But I wasn't finished yet. Monica's relationship with Greg wasn't just an affair. It was a transaction. She'd sold herself on promises, on leverage, convinced him to invest a considerable sum in a startup venture I knew was doomed to fail. The files I'd found on her laptop had detailed everything: the pitch, the projections, the expected returns. None of it was viable. But she'd sold it to him like it was a gold mine, and Greg, the arrogant bastard, had believed her. I wanted to see them both bleed for that mistake. I crafted a series of emails using a fake address I knew wouldn't be traced back to me. I kept them concise, clinical. Just enough information to plant the seed of doubt in Greg's mind, to make him question everything Monica had told him. I attached screenshots of bank records showing zero balances and forwarding them to him, pretending to be an associate concerned for his financial well-being. Nothing overt. Just hints of mismanagement, whispers of Monica's true intentions. And then I waited. The first ripple hit that evening. Monica came home earlier than usual, her face pale and tight with anxiety. I watched her silently as she paced the length of the living room, phone clutched in her hand, muttering under her breath. Every few minutes, she'd glance at me, then turn away, as if she couldn't decide whether to say something or stay quiet. Finally, she stopped, shoulders squared. "Jason," she began, voice strained, "have you noticed anything off with our bank accounts?" I raised an eyebrow, keeping my expression neutral. "Off? What do you mean?" "I mean," she hesitated, clearly unsure how to phrase it. "I tried to make a withdrawal today and there was nothing there." "Everything's gone. I don't understand." My pulse quickened, but I kept my tone light, almost amused. "Maybe you should ask Greg about that. I'm sure he has plenty to share with you." Her eyes widened, confusion giving way to shock. "Greg? What does Greg have to do with this?" I let the silence stretch, watching the realization dawn on her face. She thought she'd been playing a game with me, that she'd held all the cards. She had no idea I'd been reshuffling the entire deck right under her nose. "Jason," she breathed, voice trembling now. "What did you do?" I stood slowly, savoring the fear flickering across her features. "I took back what was mine," I said quietly. "You wanted freedom, didn't you? Well, now you have it. I'm sure Greg will be thrilled to support you when he realizes you have nothing left." "You're insane." Her voice broke, eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. You can't do this." "I already have." I smiled faintly, stepping closer until I could see the faint sheen of tears in her eyes. "Everything you thought you were using to secure your future, it's gone, Monica." You have nothing. She crumbled then, shoulders shaking as she stared down at the empty bank statements I tossed onto the table between us. I felt a sick satisfaction watching her struggle to hold herself together. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Good luck explaining that to Greg, I murmured. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to know the money he invested was tied up with mine. What are you talking about? Her voice was shrill, panic evident. I shrugged, feigning indifference. I reached out to him earlier. Just a friendly heads up, about the financial situation. About your extracurricular activities. I paused, watching her expression darken. He seemed very interested. Monica's face drained of color, eyes widening in horror. You didn't. Jason, please tell me you didn't. I leaned in, lowering my voice. You wanted to play games, Monica? I'm just making sure you understand the rules. She stood there, trembling, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clutched at the papers like they were her lifeline. I turned away, a sense of finality settling over me. This was just the beginning. I'd taken everything, left her stripped and vulnerable. But the real blow would come when Greg pulled out of their deal, when she realized there was no one left to turn to. No money, no security, no future. She sank to her knees, sobbing quietly. Why? Why would you do this? I paused at the doorway, glancing back at the woman who'd once been my wife. Because you thought I was weak, I said softly. You thought you could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. But you were wrong, Monica. I'm not weak. I'm the one who decides how this ends. I left her there, crumpled and broken, not even bothering to look back. In the silence that followed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. She had no idea what was coming next, how thoroughly I was going to dismantle everything she'd built, how I'd watch her dreams crumble to dust. The game wasn't over. Not yet. It was just getting started. And when it ended, she'd know exactly what it felt like to have nothing. I stared out into the darkness beyond the window, listening to her sobs echo faintly through the house. It should have made me feel something. Triumph, maybe. Satisfaction. But there was only emptiness. I'd hollowed myself out, replaced love and trust with a cold determination. Enjoy it while you can, Monica, I whispered. There's so much more to lose. I didn't have to wait long. By the next morning, Monica's phone calls started coming in rapid succession, each one ringing out unanswered as I watched her name flash across my screen. I could almost see her panicking on the other end, frantically hitting redial, desperate for me to pick up. But I wasn't interested in hearing her voice right now, not when I knew I had already set things in motion. Instead, I focused on my own preparations, scanning through her messages, emails, and everything else she hadn't thought to cover. I'd become an expert in surveillance, a master of manipulation. Each frantic voicemail she left only fueled my resolve. I forwarded a few key emails to Greg anonymously, making sure the attachments contained damning evidence, Monica's reckless spending, and messages about shifting funds between accounts, wrapped in language that suggested malfeasance. It was enough to raise eyebrows, enough to cast shadows. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new notification. A message from Monica. Please call me, Jason. It's important. We need to talk. I'm sorry. Just, please, we need to fix this. She was starting to crack. But I didn't respond, let her stew in her own mess for a while longer. Later, I watched through the window as she pulled into the driveway, tires screeching slightly, as if she'd been driving too fast. She stumbled out, phone clutched in one hand, eyes wide with fear and confusion. I opened the front door before she could knock, my face blank and indifferent. Jason, she started, but I cut her off with a look. I know, Monica. I already know. She froze, swallowing hard. You know, what? I know everything, I said slowly, emphasizing each word. About you, about Greg, about the money. I know you've been lying to both of us. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for words, but none came. She just stood there, shaking her head like she could somehow undo the damage. But she couldn't. Not now. Jason, her voice cracked. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could fix things. I thought, You thought you could play us both? I interrupted, my tone icy. You thought you'd be the one to come out on top. But you're not, Monica. You're at the bottom, and there's no one left to pull you up. She took a step closer, tears glistening in her eyes. Please, Jason, we can fix this. We can. I'll make it right, I swear. Just help me, please. I let the silence stretch, watching her crumble inch by inch, her desperation palpable. Then I turned away, walking back into the house, leaving the door open behind me. I heard her follow, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor as she trailed me into the living room. Jason, I'm begging you, she whispered, voice breaking. Everything's gone. Greg, he's pulling out of the investment. He says there are complications, that things don't add up. And the accounts are empty. I don't know what to do. Please, please help me. I turned to face her, hands folded calmly in front of me. You want my help? I asked quietly. After everything you have done? She nodded frantically, tears spilling over her cheeks. Yes, yes, I know I was wrong, Jason. I know I hurt you, but I can't. I don't know how to fix this alone. I need you. There was a time when her tears might have moved me, when seeing her like this, vulnerable, shattered, would have softened something inside me, but not anymore. Go to Greg, I said flatly. Let him bail you out. Her face twisted, panic flaring in her eyes. He won't talk to me. He thinks I've been stealing. Jason, I don't have anyone else. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a shiver down her spine. Then you're exactly where you deserve to be. Alone. With nothing. She fell to her knees, sobbing openly now, hands clenched into fists on the floor. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I never meant to. Please, Jason, please. For a long moment, I just watched her. This was it, the culmination of all my planning, all my anger and hurt. This was the woman who had betrayed me, humiliated me, reduced me to a shell of who I used to be. Now she was the one at my feet, begging for mercy. I'll give you one chance, I said softly, crouching down so I was at eye level with her. One opportunity to walk away with some dignity left. Tell Greg the truth. Admit everything. Own up to the lies you've been feeding him. She stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. But if I do that, he'll leave me. I nodded slowly. Exactly. And then maybe you'll finally understand what it feels like to lose everything you thought you had. Her sobs grew louder, her body trembling as she rocked back and forth on her knees. I can't do that, Jason. I'll have nothing left. I'll be broke, I finished for her, my voice cold and unfeeling. Destitute, alone. Her gaze snapped up to mine, something fierce and desperate in her eyes. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She spat, anger flaring briefly through the tears, watching me fall apart. You're getting off on it. I didn't deny it. There was a sick satisfaction in seeing her like this, knowing I was the one who'd brought her to her knees. But it was more than that. This was about reclaiming my own sense of power, my control. She'd taken everything from me, my pride, my trust, my peace of mind. Now it was her turn to be stripped bare. Maybe I am, I murmured, standing up slowly. Or maybe I just want you to understand what real consequences feel like. Monica's expression hardened, the remnants of her pride flaring up one last time. You think you've won, don't you? She hissed. But this won't make you happy. It won't make you whole. No, I agreed softly. But it'll make you hurt. And that's enough for now. She stumbled to her feet, swaying slightly as she wiped the tears from her face. You're a monster, she whispered, voice shaking with fury and despair. You're worse than I ever thought you could be. I shrugged, indifferent to the accusation. Maybe, but at least I'm honest about it. Can you say the same? Her eyes flashed with anger, but she said nothing. Just stood there, breathing heavily, as if she were holding herself together by sheer force of will. Then she turned on her heel and marched toward the door, shoulders stiff with defiance. I watched her go, the cold satisfaction giving way to a strange, hollow emptiness. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? To see her broken and humiliated. to make her suffer for everything she'd done. But as the door slammed shut behind her, I felt no triumph, no sense of victory, just nothing. I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the empty space where she'd stood moments ago. The silence of the house pressed in around me, suffocating and heavy. This was what I'd fought for, what I'd sacrificed everything to achieve. I'd won. I'd crushed her, stripped her of everything she valued. But there was no satisfaction, no closure. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was a monster. But she'd made me this way. I'd been a good man once, trusting, loving, loyal. And she'd shattered that man with every lie, every betrayal. This version of me, the one who took pleasure in her pain, it was her creation. I leaned back, closing my eyes, the emptiness settling deeper into my bones. There was no going back now, no undoing what had been done. And as I sat there, the realization washed over me. I wasn't just punishing her. I was punishing myself too. The phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Greg this time. "Jason?" His voice was tight, strained. I don't know what's going on, but I got your emails. The ones about Monica's financial situation. Look, man, I'm not getting involved. I'm pulling out of everything. Just thought you should know." I smiled faintly, a bitter twist of satisfaction curling through me. "Good decision, Greg, for both of us." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. She won't have anything left, will she?" "No," I said quietly. "She won't." "Jesus," he muttered. "You really went all out, didn't you?" "Only way to play," I replied, voice devoid of emotion. He hung up without another word, and I tossed the phone aside, staring up at the ceiling. The game was over. The house of cards I'd built had come crashing down, and Monica was left with nothing but the wreckage. But instead of feeling victorious, I felt empty, like I'd lost something more than just a marriage, like I'd lost myself in the process. This was it then. The revenge I dreamed of, the moment I'd fought for, and it tasted like ash in my mouth. "Enjoy your freedom, Monica," I whispered to the empty room. "It's all you've got left." But the words rang hollow, swallowed by the silence that would be my only companion from now on. The bar was almost empty, the soft hum of background jazz filling the air. I sat at a small corner table, nursing a glass of bourbon as I waited. It had taken weeks to set this up, to coax her into meeting me on my terms. Each step had been meticulous, carefully orchestrated, guiding her back into my orbit. I told her what she wanted to hear, that I was willing to talk, to find some semblance of closure, that I wanted to help her. It wasn't entirely a lie. She showed up 15 minutes late, hesitating at the entrance like a child unsure if they were allowed in. Her appearance startled me. I barely recognized her. Monica, always so polished and put together, now looked like a ghost of herself. Her clothes hung off her frame, hair limp and unkempt. Her face was gaunt, eyes hollow. She scanned the room, searching for me, and when she finally spotted me, her shoulders sagged in visible relief. I didn't get up to greet her. I just sat there, watching her stumble toward me with that fragile, tentative smile. It was a face I hadn't seen in years, the one she used to wear before ambition and discontent twisted her into something unrecognizable. "Jason," she breathed, her voice carrying an edge of desperation as she slid into the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my drink. "You look different." She glanced down at herself, shame flashing across her features. Yeah, it's been a rough few weeks, but She cleared her throat, trying to muster a semblance of composure. "I'm getting by." I leaned back, studying her. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, as I let her squirm under my gaze. She fidgeted with her hands, unable to meet my eyes for long. "Why did you ask me to come here, Jason?" she finally asked, voice small. I took my time answering, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "I wanted to see you," I said softly, "to see what's left." Her lips parted slightly, confusion and hurt warring on her face. "What's left?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Of you, Monica. Of what we used to have. You've lost everything now, haven't you? Your money, your so-called lover. What's left? She recoiled like I'd slapped her. I didn't. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. I didn't come here to argue, Jason. I came because I don't know where else to turn. I don't have anyone left. That's because you pushed them all away, I said flatly. You burned every bridge, thinking you'd be fine on your own. But you weren't, were you? Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. It wasn't just a mistake, Monica. It was a choice. Every single lie, every betrayal, every time you looked me in the eye and said you loved me while you were screwing him behind my back, those were choices. The words hung between us, cutting through the pretense of civility like a blade. She flinched, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but Sorry? I cut her off, my voice rising. You think that's what I want to hear? That you're sorry? That you regret it now that you're at rock bottom? You should have been sorry when I still gave a damn. But you weren't. You were too busy chasing whatever you thought would make you happy. Her face crumpled, sobs racking her thin frame. I watched dispassionately as she covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, seeing her break down, seeing her realize that I was her last lifeline, and I had every intention of letting her drown. But instead of feeling satisfaction, there was only a heavy, aching emptiness. Please, Jason, she whispered through her sobs. Please, I'm begging you, just tell me what I can do. I'll do anything. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Anything. The same words she'd probably whispered to Greg. The same words she'd used to manipulate her way into getting what she wanted. She was good at this, playing the victim, making people believe she was something fragile and breakable. But I knew better now. There's nothing left to do, Monica, I said quietly. Nothing to fix. You've ruined everything. And now you're just here, picking up the pieces. She shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her face. No, that's not true. We can start over. You're right. I made terrible choices, but I see that now. Her voice choked off as she struggled to breathe, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. I want to make things right. Please, Jason, I need you. The irony of it all was almost too much to bear. She'd needed me all along. But not because she loved me, not because she cared about what we had. She needed me because I was her safety net, her fallback, the person she could run to when everything else went to hell. And I'd been that person for far too long. Why? I asked softly. Why should I give you anything? After what you've done? Her gaze locked with mine, raw and pleading. Because I love you. The words were so absurd, so hollow that I couldn't help it. I laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that echoed through the empty bar. Love? I repeated incredulously. You think this is love? You think what you did to me was love? I was lost, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was confused. I didn't know how to be happy. I thought, no, you didn't think, I snapped. You acted. You took everything we had and you threw it away. For what, Monica? For some fantasy of a life you thought would be better without me? She was crying harder now, gasping for breath between sobs. I don't know. I don't know why. I did it. You just didn't care, I finished coldly. You didn't care about me or us or what it would do to me. Silence stretched between us, thick with grief and anger, and the weight of everything we'd lost. She looked at me with those my tear-filled eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The one who'd made me believe in forever. But that woman was gone, and all that was left was this shell of a person who didn't even know what she was sorry for. I came here to say goodbye, I said, finally, my voice quiet and steady. Not to help you, not to fix anything. Just to make it clear that whatever you thought you could salvage, it's over. Her face went pale, eyes widening in shock. No, she whispered. No, Jason, please. Don't, don't do this. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back. You already did this, Monica. You ended us the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. I could see the realization sinking in, the full weight of it crushing her as she scrambled out of her chair, reaching for me. Please, she begged, voice hoarse. Please, Jason, I'll do anything. I'll prove it to you. Just don't leave me like this. Don't walk away. I looked down at her trembling hands clutching my arm, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to pity. But it wasn't enough to sway me. Not anymore. I'm not leaving you, I said softly. I'm leaving who I used to be. The man who would have forgiven you. The man who would have let you back in. Her grip tightened, her nails digging into my skin. I'll change, I swear. I'll be better. You don't get it, do you? I whispered, leaning in close. It's not about you anymore. It's about me. It's about letting go of what you did to me. And I have. Her hands fell away, a broken sob escaping her lips as she crumpled back into the chair, staring up at me with shattered eyes. So what now? She asked dully, voice devoid of hope. Now, Lindian. I stepped back, turning my gaze to the exit. Now I move on. And then I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. I turned my back on her and walked away, leaving her alone in that empty bar. I didn't look back. I didn't hesitate. The sound of her sobs faded behind me as I pushed through the doors and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. It was cleansing, washing away the last remnants of who I'd been. For the first time in months, I felt something other than anger or pain. I felt free. Maybe this was how it had to end, not with a scream or a shout, but with a quiet acceptance. She'd destroyed what we had, and I'd taken everything from her in return. We were both empty now, both broken in different ways, but I'd walk away with my head high, and she'd have to live with the knowledge that this was the end she'd chosen. With every step I took, I felt the weight lift a little more, until the darkness of the night swallowed me whole, and I was finally, mercifully alone. It's been a month since I walked out of that bar, leaving Monica crumpled and broken. A month of silence. Of empty, still nights and mornings that stretch into blurred hours. I thought the emptiness would fade once I severed our final tie, that I'd find some semblance of peace. But there's no closure, no satisfying exhale. The house is quieter than I ever imagined it could be, and the echoes of what used to be cling to every corner. I've moved most of her things out, clothes stuffed into suitcases I left on the porch, framed photos turned face down and stored in boxes shoved into the attic. The tangible reminders are gone, but she lingers in the spaces we once shared. A shadow that refuses to dissipate. It's as if I'm living in a memory, a place suspended between what was and what could have been. The day after our last confrontation, I expected her to call. Or show up at the door, face streaked with tears, begging for a second chance. But there was nothing. Just the silence between us growing more profound. I had my victory. She knew there was no coming back, no reconciliation. She'd finally understood what it meant to be truly alone. The first week passed in a daze. I caught myself checking my phone every few minutes, half expecting a message, a missed call. But the screen remained dark, the emptiness of it taunting me. I threw myself into work, into pointless tasks that filled the hours but left me feeling more drained than before. Even the satisfaction of watching her crumble, of seeing her desperate and defeated, turned bitter in my mouth. By the second week, I knew I had to do something. Anything to break the cycle. I'd stopped drinking, though it was more out of habit than any conscious decision. I'd gone for long, aimless drives at night, windows down, the cold wind slashing through my thoughts. But everywhere I went, every corner I turned, something would trigger a memory of her. A laugh we shared, a fight that turned into passion, the way she used to look at me when she thought I wasn't watching, eyes soft and full of a warmth that's been long extinguished. It's maddening how betrayal seeps into everything. How even the good moments, the ones that should be untouchable, become tainted. A disease spreading through your mind, making you question if any of it was real to begin with. I started attending a support group, sat in a circle of strangers, each of us scarred in different ways. I didn't say much at first, just listened. Stories of infidelity, of trust shattered and lives upended. Some people still seethed with anger. Others spoke of reconciliation, forgiveness, moving on. I envied them. It took a while before I could even speak Monica's name aloud. But when I finally did, the words spilled out in a rush, venom and grief entwined. There was no judgment from the group, just nods of understanding. A few murmured reassurances. It helped in a way. To know that I wasn't alone in the pain, even if my revenge had isolated me from the possibility of healing. Revenge is a poison, an older man had said one night, his eyes shadowed with years of regret. It eats at you, leaves you empty. The person who hurt you keeps living in your head, and you keep letting them. His words struck a chord. I'd spent so long plotting Monica's downfall, thinking it would be the salve I needed, that her suffering would somehow erase mine. But I was still here, still trapped in the aftermath of my own making. I'd burned down everything around us, only to find myself standing in the ashes. It's strange how time shifts, how days blend together when you're trying to rebuild yourself. I started with small steps. Reached out to a few old friends, people I distanced myself from during the worst of it. They welcomed me back, cautiously at first, but with genuine warmth. There were awkward silences and questions left unasked, but we moved past them, rebuilding the connections piece by piece. I signed up for a class, something I never thought I'd do. Photography. A random choice, something that caught my eye on a flyer pinned to a coffee shop bulletin board. The first few sessions were rough. I felt out of place, a fraud among the others who spoke so passionately about capturing moments, about finding beauty in the mundane. But then slowly I started to see it. The way light could transform a scene, the subtle details that I'd overlooked in my rush to control everything around me. I found myself lingering in places I would have breezed past before, looking through the lens with a new perspective. The world didn't seem so stark, so divided into black and white. There were shades of gray, textures and layers I'd been too blinded by anger to appreciate. It became a sort of therapy, a way to channel the chaos inside me into something tangible. I'd spend hours framing shots, focusing on the intricacies of a single leaf or the way shadows played across cracked pavement. It was a relief, this quiet concentration, a balm for the jagged edges of my thoughts. Monica's presence in my life faded with each new photograph, each small achievement that was mine and mine alone. She became less of a specter and more of a reminder of how far I'd let myself fall and how much further I had to go. One evening, I received an unexpected message from her. No long paragraphs, no pleas for forgiveness, just a simple, unassuming sentence. Thank you for meeting me that night. I needed to hear it. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words blurring in front of me. Then I deleted it, not bothering to reply. There was no point. We'd said everything we needed to say in that bar. The finality of it still hung between us, an invisible barrier that could never be crossed. But something shifted in me after that. As if her acknowledgement, however small, had closed a door I hadn't realized was still ajar. I let go of the last traces of resentment, the lingering need for retribution. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd made my choices, so had she. The following weeks brought a quiet clarity. I poured myself into work with a renewed focus, no longer driven by a need to distract myself, but by a genuine sense of purpose. I started running in the mornings, the crisp air filling my lungs, pushing my body to exhaustion. Each stride was a reminder that I was still here, still moving forward. One Saturday, I decided to take a short trip out of town, somewhere I'd always meant to visit but never found the time. It was a small, unassuming place on the coast, known for its rocky cliffs and quiet solitude. I took my camera, not expecting much, just wanting to see something new. Standing on the edge of those cliffs, staring out at the vast expanse of ocean, I felt a strange sense of peace. The wind whipped around me, cold and bracing, but it felt good, like I was being stripped down to the essentials. The waves crashed below, relentless and unyielding, erasing and reshaping the shore with every impact. I took picture after picture, trying to capture the raw power of it all, the beauty of something so wild, so indifferent to the struggles of the people standing above it. By the time I left, I knew I was done looking back. The man I'd been with Monica, the one who'd held on to love and betrayal with equal fervor, was gone. And in his place, someone new was emerging. Someone who wasn't defined by her choices or by the pain she'd caused. When I returned home that evening, I felt lighter. I stood in the middle of my now sparsely furnished living room, taking in the emptiness that had once suffocated me. It didn't feel so oppressive anymore. It felt like potential, a blank canvas waiting to be filled. I set down my camera, the last light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. I thought about the old Jason, the one who'd been crushed by betrayal, who'd let bitterness consume him. He'd served his purpose, he'd fought, he'd bled, and now he was finally at rest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a decision. I'd leave this place, this city. It was time to start fresh, somewhere Monica's ghost wouldn't follow, somewhere I could build something new, away from the wreckage we'd left behind. I packed my things over the next few days, boxing up what little remained of my old life. There was no sadness, no lingering regret, just a sense of closure. I wasn't running from my past. I was stepping into the future. The last night, as I stood at the door, looking back one final time, I felt a strange sort of gratitude for the pain, for the lessons learned, for the strength I'd found in the midst of destruction. "Goodbye, Monica," I murmured softly, though there was no one to hear it. Then I turned the key in the lock and walked away. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I was ready to face it. Not as a man defined by vengeance or loss, but as someone who'd survived. Someone who'd found his way back to himself. And as I drove away, the night stretching out before me, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope,